Karen was the kind of person who always seemed to think she deserved more than what life handed her. She walked through the airport with a sense of purpose, her designer handbag slung over one shoulder, and oversized sunglasses perched on top of her perfectly styled hair. Her heels clicked against the tiled floor as she made her way to Gate 17, where her flight from New York to Los Angeles was boarding. This wasn't just any trip. It was a chance for Karen to escape the monotony of her daily routine and head off to a luxury spa retreat in California. As she approached the gate, Karen couldn't help but roll her eyes at the long line snaking toward the plane. "Why does everything have to take so long?" she muttered under her breath, checking her watch dramatically. The airline staff called out groups one by one, and when it was finally Karen's turn, she breezed past them without so much as a "thank you." Boarding first class, she expected nothing less than perfection. The moment Karen stepped onto the plane, she scanned the rows with a critical eye. Everything had to be perfect. Her seat needed to be clean. There shouldn't be anyone loud nearby, and most importantly, she didn't want some stranger invading her personal space. As she slid into her window seat, she noticed her seatmate, a man already settled comfortably beside her. He was dressed sharply in a navy suit, his posture relaxed but confident. His name was Marcus, though Karen wouldn't learn that until later. Marcus glanced up briefly as Karen squeezed past him, giving her a polite nod and a small smile. "Hi," he said softly before returning to his book. But Karen didn't respond. Instead, she sighed loudly as if his mere presence inconvenienced her. Without even looking at him, she dropped her bag onto the floor, claiming the shared armrest as her own within seconds. It was clear she had no intention of making this a pleasant experience for anyone else. For the next few minutes, Karen fussed over every little detail. Her phone charger wasn't working properly. The air conditioning vent above her head blew too strongly, or not enough depending on her mood. And why did these seats feel smaller than last time? Each complaint came out louder than the last, drawing irritated glances from nearby passengers. Meanwhile, Marcus stayed quiet, flipping pages in his book as if none of it bothered him. Though Karen acted like she didn't care about anyone around her, deep down, she secretly hoped people would notice how put upon she felt. Maybe then someone would offer her an upgrade or apologize profusely for all these imagined slights. But instead, all she got was silence, and Marcus calmly ignoring her theatrics. As the plane taxied down the runway, Karen finally turned her attention to the man sitting beside her. She studied him for a brief moment, taking in his polished appearance and calm demeanor. For reasons she couldn't quite explain, his composure annoyed her. Who did he think he was, acting so unfazed? By her superiority? Little did Karen know, her growing irritation was about to boil over, and things were about to get much worse before they got better. The hum of the plane's engines filled the cabin as it soared smoothly through the clouds. Karen, who had been scrolling endlessly on her phone, glanced up briefly to check the time. Her irritation hadn't faded since takeoff. If anything, it had grown stronger with each passing minute. The cramped space, the faint smell of airplane food wafting through the air, and the constant chatter around her grated on her nerves. But what really bothered her was Marcus. He sat quietly beside her, seemingly unbothered by the chaos that Karen found so unbearable. His book rested open in his lap and he flipped pages occasionally, pausing to sip from his bottle of water. Every movement he made seemed deliberate, calm, controlled, almost meditative. To Karen, it felt like a personal affront. How could someone be so relaxed while she was stuck here suffering? Her eyes narrowed slightly as she studied him again. This time, she let her gaze linger longer than before, scrutinizing everything about him, the way his suit fit perfectly, the neatly trimmed beard framing his face, the gold watch glinting faintly under the dim cabin lights. None of it escaped her notice. And then, there was the color of his skin. Karen didn't say anything out loud yet, but her expression hardened ever so slightly at the realization that this man wasn't like her. When the plane hit a patch of mild turbulence, Marcus instinctively adjusted his seatbelt, shifting slightly in his seat. In doing so, his elbow brushed against Karen's arm, a fleeting, accidental touch, but to Karen, it might as well have been an invasion of her personal fortress. She recoiled dramatically, pulling her arm away as though she'd touched something hot. Her voice cut through the quiet cabin like a knife. "Watch it!" she snapped, turning sharply toward him. Her tone was sharp enough to make nearby passengers glance over curiously. Marcus froze for a split second, clearly caught off guard by the sudden outburst. Then slowly, he turned his head to meet her gaze. "I'm sorry," he said calmly, his voice even and measured. "That wasn't intentional." But Karen wasn't satisfied. She huffed loudly, shaking her head as if he'd committed some unforgivable crime. Leaning back in her seat, she crossed her arms tightly across her chest and muttered under her breath, just loud enough for him, and possibly the people seated closest to them, to hear. "Figures. People like him always think they own the whole place." Marcus stiffened momentarily, his fingers tightening around the edge of his book. He heard every word she said, loud and clear. For a moment, he considered responding, maybe pointing out how unfair and ridiculous her comment was, but instead he took a deep breath, forcing himself to stay composed. There was no point escalating things further. Not now, not on this flight. Instead, he offered her a tight, polite smile before turning his attention back to his book, pretending as though nothing had happened. Karen, however, wasn't done. Emboldened by the fact that Marcus hadn't retaliated, she shifted uncomfortably, in her seat, muttering more complaints under her breath. "Always taking up too much space," she grumbled, glaring at the armrest between them. "Never mind that I paid good money for this seat. Some people just don't know their limits." Her words hung heavy in the air, dripping with thinly veiled hostility. A few passengers exchanged uneasy glances, sensing the tension building between the two. One woman seated across the aisle shook her head subtly, clearly disapproving of Karen's behavior. Even the flight attendant passing through the aisle paused for a moment, her lips pressed into a thin line as she observed the situation. Despite the growing unease around them, Marcus remained silent. He focused on his breathing, keeping his emotions in check, but inside he couldn't help but feel frustrated. Why did people like Karen always assume the worst about others based on appearances? Still, he reminded himself that reacting wouldn't solve anything. Sometimes silence spoke louder than words. As the minutes ticked by, Karen continued to stew in her anger, occasionally shooting venomous looks in Marcus's direction. Meanwhile, Marcus kept reading, though his concentration was broken. The peaceful atmosphere he'd enjoyed earlier was gone, replaced by an invisible cloud of tension. Little did either of them know, this was only the beginning of what would turn into a long and unforgettable flight. Karen's frustration continued to simmer, bubbling just beneath the surface like a pot about to boil over. Every little thing seemed to annoy her. Every sound, every movement, every breath Marcus took felt like a personal affront. She had convinced herself that he was deliberately trying to make her uncomfortable, even though it was clear to everyone else that Marcus was simply minding his own business. The flight attendant arrived with drinks, pushing her cart slowly down the aisle. When she reached Karen and Marcus's row, she greeted them warmly. "Can I get you something to drink?" she asked, her tone cheerful despite the long hours on her feet. Karen barely acknowledged her, waving dismissively as she ordered a soda, without even saying please or thank you. The flight attendant nodded politely and turned to Marcus, who smiled and requested water. "Thank you so much," Marcus said kindly, his voice warm and genuine. The flight attendant returned his smile, handing him a small bottle of water before moving on to the next row. Karen watched the exchange with narrowed eyes, her lips curling into a sneer. To her, it felt like Marcus was putting on a show, trying to look better than her in front of the crew. Her grip tightened around her soda can, and she muttered under her breath, loud enough for Marcus and possibly the passengers nearby to hear. "Of course he gets special treatment," she grumbled, rolling her eyes dramatically. Always playing the victim card. Marcus froze mid-sip, lowering his bottle slowly. He stared at her for a moment, his expression unreadable. Then, with a deep sigh, he set the bottle down on the tray table in front of him. "I'm not sure what you're implying," he said, calmly, his voice steady but firm. "But I didn't ask for anything special. Just water. Karen scoffed, leaning back in her seat as if his explanation meant nothing. Sure, okay, she replied sarcastically, her tone dripping with mockery. But we all know how this works, don't we? Some people always find a way to make everything about them. Her words hung in the air, heavy and loaded. A few passengers seated nearby exchanged awkward glances, unsure of whether to intervene or stay out of it. One older man sitting across the aisle shook his head slightly, muttering something under his breath that sounded suspiciously like, "What a piece of work." Meanwhile, a young woman seated behind them pulled out her phone, subtly opening the camera app. Something told her this confrontation wasn't going to end anytime soon, and she wanted to document it. Marcus chose not to respond further. Instead, he picked up his book again, flipping to the page where he'd left off. But Karen wasn't ready to let it go. She shifted in her seat, crossing her legs forcefully and letting out an exaggerated sigh. "You know," she began, her voice louder now, almost theatrical, "it's people like you who ruin flights for everyone else. Always making excuses, always playing the blame game." This time, Marcus didn't bother hiding his irritation. He closed his book gently and placed it on his lap, turning to face her fully. His calm demeanor remained intact, but there was a flicker of steel in his eyes. "People like me," he repeated, raising an eyebrow. "And what exactly does that mean?" Karen hesitated for a split second, caught off guard by his direct question. But she quickly recovered, leaning forward slightly as if preparing for battle. "You know exactly what I mean," she shot back, her voice rising. "Acting entitled, expecting everyone to cater to your needs. It's exhausting." The tension between them was palpable now, crackling like electricity in the confined space of the airplane cabin. Passengers who had been pretending not to listen earlier were now fully invested, their attention glued to the unfolding drama. Some looked sympathetic toward Marcus, while others appeared visibly annoyed by Karen's behavior. Even the flight attendants seemed to sense the growing hostility, exchanging worried glances as they passed by. Despite the mounting pressure, Marcus kept his cool. He leaned back in his seat, folding his hands neatly in his lap. "If you're looking for a fight," he said quietly, his voice carrying just enough weight to silence Karen momentarily, "you're not going to get one from me. I'm just here to enjoy my flight. Same as everyone else." His words struck a nerve. Karen opened her mouth to retort, but no sound came out. For a brief moment she faltered, unsure of how to respond to his composed demeanor. But her pride wouldn't let her back down completely. Instead, she crossed her arms tightly across her chest and turned away, muttering something unintelligible under her breath. Though the argument appeared to have paused for now, the tension lingered, thick and suffocating. Neither Karen nor Marcus spoke again for several minutes, but the unspoken animosity between them filled the space like a storm cloud waiting to burst. And somewhere in the back of the plane, the young woman who had started recording smirked faintly as she saved the video to her phone, knowing full well that this wasn't the last they'd hear from Karen today. The tension between Karen and Marcus had reached a boiling point, but Marcus wasn't interested in letting it escalate. Further, he knew people like Karen, those who thrived on conflict, who fed off drama and chaos, and he refused to give her the satisfaction of a reaction. Instead, he focused on staying calm, determined not to let her behavior ruin his flight. When the flight attendant returned with snacks, she greeted them both warmly, offering a basket of pretzels and cookies. Karen barely glanced at her, grabbing a packet of pretzels without so much as a thank you. The flight attendant smiled politely and turned to Marcus, who kindly thanked her before selecting a small pack of cookies. "Would you like anything else?" she asked, her tone friendly and professional. "No, thank you," Marcus replied with a genuine smile. "You've been great." The flight attendant nodded and moved on to the next row, leaving the two passengers alone once again. Karen watched the exchange with thinly veiled annoyance, rolling her eyes when Marcus opened his pack of cookies. She muttered under her breath, loud enough for him to hear, "Of course he gets cookies too. Figures." Marcus paused for a moment, considering her comment. Then, with deliberate calmness, He pulled out one of the cookies from the package and held it out toward Karen. His expression was polite, almost mocking in its perfection. "Would you like one?" he asked, his voice smooth and even. "I wouldn't want you to feel left out." Karen stared at him, caught completely off guard by the gesture. For a brief second, her mouth opened as if she intended to accept the cookie, or maybe insult him further, but then she snapped it shut, glaring at him instead. "No thanks," she spat, her tone dripping with disdain. "I don't need your charity." Marcus shrugged, unfazed by her rejection. "Suit yourself," he said lightly, popping the cookie into his own mouth. He chewed slowly, savoring the sweetness as if to emphasize just how little her attitude affected him. It was a subtle move, but it spoke volumes. Nearby passengers couldn't help but notice the exchange. A young couple seated across the aisle exchanged amused glances, stifling laughter behind their hands. One older woman shook her head disapprovingly at Karen, muttering something about manners under her breath. Even the teenager recording the scene earlier smirked, zooming in on Karen's increasingly flustered expression. Karen, however, was far from amused. Her face flushed red, partly from embarrassment and partly from anger. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat, crossing her arms tightly across her chest. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, though it was unclear whether she was talking to herself or trying to bait Marcus into another argument. But Marcus remained silent, focusing instead on enjoying his snack. He took another cookie from the package, this time making a show of offering it to the passenger seated directly behind him, a middle-aged man who accepted it with a chuckle and a nod of thanks. The act seemed innocent enough, but Karen interpreted it as a direct jab at her. "You're really something, aren't you?" she snapped, her voice louder now, drawing even more attention from the surrounding passengers. "Going around handing out cookies like you're some kind of saint." Marcus raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. "Just being neighborly," he replied casually, his tone laced with sarcasm. "Isn't that what we're supposed to do on flights? Be nice to each other?" Karen bristled at his words, her cheeks burning with indignation. She wanted to lash out, to say something cutting and clever that would put him in his place. But no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't come up with a comeback sharp enough to match his composure. Instead, she settled for huffing loudly and turning away, staring out the window as if the sight of clouds could soothe her bruised ego. Meanwhile, the ripple effect of Marcus's actions spread through the cabin. Passengers who had witnessed the cookie exchange began whispering among themselves, sharing knowing looks and quiet giggles. Some even started clapping softly when Marcus offered a cookie to yet another grateful recipient. By the time he finished, the pack he had unintentionally become the unexpected hero of the flight. Karen, on the other hand, felt more isolated than ever. Her attempts to assert dominance had backfired spectacularly, leaving her looking petty and unreasonable. As the murmurs of approval for Marcus grew louder, she sank deeper into her seat, avoiding eye contact with anyone nearby. For the first time since Boa, just as Karen thought she couldn't feel any more humiliated, the universe decided to intervene. The plane, which had been cruising smoothly through the sky, suddenly hit a patch of severe turbulence. It started with a gentle shake, the kind that barely rattles your drink cup, but within seconds the aircraft was jolting violently, bouncing up and down as if caught in an invisible storm. The seatbelt sign flashed on overhead, accompanied by the captain's calm but firm voice instructing everyone to return to their seats and buckle up. Karen, who had been stewing in her seat, gripping the armrests tightly even before the turbulence began, panicked immediately. Her eyes widened and her breathing turned shallow. She hated flying under normal circumstances, and this sudden chaos felt like the universe conspiring against her. As the plane dipped sharply, she let out a high-pitched squeal, clutching at anything nearby for stability, including Marcus's arm. Marcus, who had been calmly flipping through his book, barely flinched at the turbulence. He'd flown enough times to know that these things happened and rarely amounted to anything serious. But when he felt Karen's nails digging into his forearm, he turned to look at her, his expression a mix of surprise and mild amusement. "Are you okay?" he asked, raising his voice slightly to be heard over the noise of the shaking plane. Karen didn't respond, at least not with words. Instead, she clung to him tighter, her knuckles white as she squeezed his arm like it was her lifeline. "We're going to crash," she wailed, her voice trembling with fear. "Oh my God, we're all going to die." Her dramatic declaration drew nervous laughter from a few passengers nearby, though most were too busy bracing themselves to pay much attention. Marcus gently pried her fingers off his arm, careful not to hurt her, but firm enough to make his point. "Relax," he said evenly. "It's just turbulence. We're fine." But Karen wasn't listening. She grabbed onto him again, this time with both hands, practically climbing into his lap in her desperation. Marcus sighed audibly, shifting slightly to create some distance between them. "You're safe," he repeated, his tone patient but firm. "Take a deep breath." For once, Karen seemed too preoccupied with her own terror to care about Marcus or anyone else around her. Tears streamed down her face as she muttered prayers under her breath, alternating between pleading with God and cursing the airline for what she was sure was their incompetence. Her mascara smeared across her cheeks, giving her a disheveled, almost comical appearance. Meanwhile, other passengers handled the situation with varying degrees of calmness. Some leaned back in their seats, closing their eyes and waiting for the turbulence to pass. Others held onto their armrests or the shoulders of the person next to them, exchanging nervous smiles and jokes about needing a stiff drink when they landed. The teenager recording earlier steadied her phone, capturing footage of the chaotic cabin, and Karen's meltdown in particular. As quickly as it had started, the turbulence subsided, leaving the plane steady once again. The captain came over the intercom to assure everyone that they were safe and apologize for the inconvenience. Passengers exhaled collectively, some laughing nervously, while others applauded the crew for keeping things under control. Karen, however, remained frozen in place, her grip on Marcus's arm loosening only slightly. "You can let go now," Marcus said dryly, flexing his hand to restore circulation. "We're not crashing." Karen blinked rapidly, finally releasing him and sinking back into her seat. Her face was pale, her makeup smeared, and her hair slightly askew. She glanced around the cabin, noticing for the first time how ridiculous she must have looked clinging to a stranger like a child during a thunderstorm. A few passengers avoided her gaze entirely, while others smirked openly, clearly amused by the spectacle she'd made of herself. And then there was the video. Unbeknownst to Karen, the teenager seated behind her had captured the entire scene. The insults, the cookie exchange, and now her panic-stricken meltdown. All on camera. The clip was already gaining traction online, shared by fellow passengers, who found themselves entertained by the unfolding drama. Comments poured in, ranging from sympathetic support for Marcus to scathing criticism of Karen's behavior. By the time the plane leveled out completely, Karen's bravado had evaporated. She sat quietly in her seat, staring straight ahead, her mind racing with thoughts of what might happen next. For the first time since boarding the flight, she realized she wasn't the one in control, and karma had chosen its moment to strike back. As the plane descended toward Los Angeles, Karen tried to compose herself. She wiped her tear-streaked face with a tissue, smudging her makeup even further, and attempted to fix her hair in the tiny reflection of her phone screen. But no amount of primping could erase the shame she felt, or the stares from passengers who had witnessed her meltdown. During the turbulence, some looked at her with pity, others with amusement, but most avoided eye contact altogether, likely recalling how far she had fallen from her earlier air of superiority. Meanwhile, Marcus remained calm and collected, scrolling through his phone, as if nothing unusual had happened. He didn't gloat or make snide comments about Karen's behavior. He simply acted as though she didn't exist. That indifference stung more than anything else. Karen wanted him to yell back, to lose his cool, to give her some excuse to justify her attitude. But his silence was deafening, a quiet reminder that her actions spoke louder than any words ever could. The landing process began, and the cabin buzzed with the usual excitement of arriving at their destination. Passengers gathered their belongings, zipping up bags and slipping on shoes. Yet amidst the hustle, whispers about Karen continued to ripple through the rows. Someone mentioned seeing the video online. It had gone viral within minutes of being uploaded, thanks to hashtags like #flight fiasco and #why karma hits back. The teenager who recorded it received hundreds of notifications, each one fueling the fire of public outrage against Karen. When the plane finally touched down, Karen bolted upright, eager to escape the cramped space where she'd endured so much humiliation. As soon as the seatbelt sign turned off, she grabbed her designer handbag and shoved past Marcus without a word, rushing toward the exit. But her hasty departure didn't go unnoticed. Several passengers clapped sarcastically as she passed, while others muttered under their breath, calling her out for her earlier rudeness. Stepping off the plane, Karen expected relief, but instead she found chaos waiting for her. A group of reporters stood near the gate, cameras flashing as they spotted Marcus walking calmly behind her. One journalist approached him first, microphone in hand. "Sir, we saw the video online. Can you tell us what happened?" Marcus hesitated for a moment, clearly uncomfortable with the sudden attention. "It's simple," he said after a pause, his voice steady and composed. "I was just trying to get through my flight peacefully. I think we can all agree that treating each other with kindness goes a long way." His response earned nods of approval from bystanders, including some passengers who had witnessed the incident firsthand. They cheered softly, applauding Marcus for handling the situation with grace. Meanwhile, Karen froze in place, realizing too late that the reporters weren't there solely for Marcus. They were also interested in her. "Ma'am, is it true you insulted your seatmate mid-flight?" another reporter asked, shoving a microphone into Karen's face. Cameras clicked rapidly, capturing her disheveled appearance and panicked expression. For once, she was speechless. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, unable to form a coherent sentence. Before she could respond, airport security stepped in, having been alerted by multiple complaints filed by passengers during the flight. They politely but firmly escorted Karen away from the crowd, explaining that they needed to discuss her conduct on board. Humiliated and defeated, Karen followed them silently, her head bowed as flashes went off around her. The same reporters who praised Marcus now turned their attention to her, peppering her with questions about racism, entitlement, and accountability. Back at the gate, Marcus declined further interviews, opting to leave quietly despite the adoration surrounding him. Passengers patted him on the back, thanking him for setting an example of patience and dignity. One older woman hugged him tightly, whispering, "You handled that beautifully." Though Marcus appreciated the support, he seemed eager to move on, disappearing into the crowd without fanfare. For Karen, however, the nightmare was only beginning. By the time she reached the security office, news outlets across social media were already dissecting her behavior. Clips of her insults, her cookie rejection, and her panic attack played on repeat, accompanied by captions labeling her as "that flight Karen." Friends tagged her in posts, strangers debated her actions, and brands she endorsed began distancing themselves publicly. In a matter of hours, Karen's life unraveled completely, all because she refused to treat someone with basic respect. As Marcus walked away from the terminal, he couldn't help but feel a mix of sadness and hope. Sadness for the ugliness he'd witnessed, but hope that stories like this might inspire people to reflect on their own behavior. Little did he know, his quiet resilience. Karen's life became a whirlwind of consequences almost immediately after the flight. The airport security team questioned her for nearly an hour, reviewing passenger complaints and even pulling up the viral video that had taken over social media. While nothing she'd done was technically illegal, her behavior was deemed unacceptable enough for the airline to issue a formal warning. They informed her that pending further investigation, she would be banned from flying with them in the future, a decision that sent shockwaves through Karen's carefully curated world. By the time she left the airport, dragging her suitcase, behind her like a defeated shadow, the backlash had reached a fever pitch. Her face was everywhere, on Twitter threads dissecting her meltdown, Instagram memes mocking her meltdown during turbulence, and YouTube compilations titled "The Worst Airline Passenger Ever." Even late-night talk show hosts joked about her antics, turning her into a punchline for millions of viewers. Friends who once praised her lavish lifestyle now blocked her on social media, unwilling to associate with someone whose name had become synonymous with entitlement and rudeness. Her workplace wasn't spared either. Karen held a senior position at a marketing firm where appearances mattered as much as results. When screenshots of hateful comments under the viral posts linked back to her LinkedIn profile, her boss called her into an emergency meeting. Sitting across from him in his sleek office, Karen felt smaller than ever before. He explained that her actions didn't align with the company's values and suggested she take a leave of absence until things blew over or risk termination. For days, Karen stayed holed up in her apartment, blinds drawn, phone notifications silenced. Every time she ventured online, she saw fresh reminders of her downfall. Hashtags trending globally, strangers speculating about her personal life, and parody accounts mocking her every move. She tried to convince herself it would pass, that people would forget about her eventually. But deep down, she knew this kind of humiliation wasn't something you simply walked away from. In contrast, Marcus found himself thrust into the spotlight, not because he sought it, but because people admired how he handled the situation with grace. Reporters tracked him down, asking for interviews about his perspective on the incident. Social media flooded with messages praising his composure, calling him a role model for patience and dignity. Strangers shared stories of their own encounters, with difficult people saying they wished they had half the strength Marcus showed on that flight. Despite the praise, Marcus remained grounded. In a brief statement posted on his professional networking profile, he wrote, "I don't believe in holding grudges or seeking revenge. What happened on that flight is a reminder that we all have moments when we fall short of our best selves. My hope is that this story inspires us to treat each other with kindness no matter the circumstances." His words resonated deeply, sparking conversations about empathy and accountability. Schools began sharing his statement in classrooms, discussing the importance of conflict resolution. Community groups invited him to speak at events, eager to learn more about his mindset during such tense situations. Though Marcus politely declined most requests, preferring to keep living quietly, he couldn't deny the impact his actions had made. Meanwhile, Karen hit rock bottom. Isolated and overwhelmed, she spent hours staring at the walls of her apartment, replaying the flight in her mind. For the first time, she allowed herself to reflect, not just on what happened, but why. Had she always been this way? Was her need for control masking deeper insecurities? These questions haunted her, forcing her to confront uncomfortable truths about herself. One evening, sitting alone in her dimly lit living room, Karen opened her laptop. Her hands trembled as she typed out a draft of an apology letter. It wasn't easy. Admitting fault went against every instinct she'd cultivated over the years. But as she poured her thoughts onto the screen, explaining how ashamed she felt and promising to educate herself on racial sensitivity, she realized it was the only way forward. The next morning, she posted the letter online, knowing full well it wouldn't fix everything. Some dismissed it as insincere, while others cautiously acknowledged her effort. Either way, Karen understood that rebuilding trust would take time, and that redemption wasn't something handed easily. Still, she resolved to do better, not for fame or forgiveness, but because she owed it to herself and those she'd hurt. As the weeks passed, the internet moved on to new scandals, leaving Karen to pick up the pieces of her shattered reputation. Meanwhile, Marcus continued living his life untouched by the chaos. Though their paths never crossed again, the lessons from that fateful flight lingered long after the headlines faded. Reminders that kindness often triumphs over cruelty, and that sometimes karma delivers exactly what we deserve. Months passed since the infamous flight, and life moved on, for everyone except Karen. While Marcus returned to his normal routine, quietly continuing his work and personal life without fanfare, Karen found herself facing a long and difficult journey towards redemption. The public outrage had died down, but the scars of her actions lingered, both in her relationships and within herself. Karen's apology letter, though met with mixed reactions, marked the beginning of her effort to change. She enrolled in diversity training workshops, attended counseling sessions to address her insecurities, and began volunteering at community organizations focused on fostering understanding across cultures. It wasn't glamorous or easy. Often she felt like an outsider looking in, struggling to navigate spaces where people didn't trust her intentions. But slowly, she started making progress, not because she sought forgiveness, but because she genuinely wanted to grow. Her transformation didn't go unnoticed. One day, while volunteering at a local food bank, Karen struck up a conversation with a woman who turned out to be one of the passengers from that fateful flight. At first, the woman hesitated, clearly recognizing Karen despite her efforts to blend in. But as they talked, Karen openly shared how much she regretted her behavior and how hard she was working to improve. To her surprise, the woman smiled faintly and said, "I'm glad you're trying. That's more than some people would do." It was a small moment, but it meant the world to Karen. For the first time in months, she felt like maybe, just maybe, she could start rebuilding her life. She continued volunteering regularly, forming connections with people who saw beyond her past mistakes. Some friendships developed cautiously, others naturally, but each one reminded her of the power of humility and second chances. Meanwhile, Marcus remained largely unaffected by the aftermath of the incident. He appreciated the praise he received, but he never let it inflate his ego. Instead, he used the experience as a reminder of the importance of patience and grace in everyday interactions. Occasionally, he'd come across articles or social media posts referencing the viral video, and while he didn't dwell on it, he hoped it served as a lesson for others about treating people with respect. One afternoon, Marcus received an email from the airline. They thanked him for his composure during the flight and invited him to participate in a campaign promoting kindness among passengers. Though initially hesitant, Marcus agreed, seeing it as an opportunity to spread positivity. His message in the campaign was simple. Conflict can bring out the worst in us, but it also gives us a chance to choose kindness instead. Let's make travel and life a little better for everyone. The campaign resonated deeply with audiences, inspiring countless stories of people choosing compassion over confrontation. Marcus became a symbol of resilience and empathy, not because he sought fame, but because he embodied values many aspired to live by. As for Karen, her road to redemption was far from smooth. There were days when old habits crept back, moments when self-doubt threatened to undo all her hard work. Yet she persevered, reminding herself that growth takes time. Eventually, she reconnected with former friends, rebuilt bridges at work, and even started mentoring young professionals on the importance of emotional intelligence and accountability. Years later, Karen reflected on the flight that changed her life. She realized it wasn't just karma striking back. It was a wake-up call, forcing her to confront parts of herself she'd ignored for too long. And while she couldn't erase her past, she could shape her future. In the end, the story of Karen and Marcus wasn't just about conflict or consequences. It was about choices. Marcus chose kindness, setting an example for others to follow. Karen chose growth, proving that no matter how far someone falls, there's always a path forward if they're willing to take it. Their paths may have diverged after that turbulent flight, but their shared experience left an indelible mark on both their lives and on the countless strangers inspired by their story.